the records that are retrieved on a lookup, one can create a custom view using Dynamics CRM native filters. However, this method only works for simple scenarios. For complex filtering, we use PreSearch Filters. And in this video, we are required to exclude contacts with the first name that begins with an A. I know that you're probably thinking that this could be achieved using native filters. The point of this video is to look at a simple scenario and introduce the concept. The concepts learned from this video will be equally applicable to much more complex scenarios which you may encounter in future, or maybe one that you are struggling with at this particular point, hence you're watching this video. Now that we know the requirement, let's look at the steps to achieve this goal. First, we will create a JavaScript web resource, and you can use any tool that you're familiar with to start coding. Second, we need to create a solution in CRM and add our resources. In my case, I've added an account entity to my solution. I've added a contact entity to my solutions, as well as our newly created PreSearch filter script. Thirdly, we link the script to the account entity. And finally, the objective, we debug the script and see the results. And I hope that you learn a lot from this one. And remember that we're dealing with this one in this video, we're only dealing with the basic pre-filter. We are logged on now into Dynamics 365, and we are looking at an account record. On the far right, if you look at the field company CEO, that is the field that we will be focusing on. It's a lookup field. It looks up to contacts. And what we are going to do is to make sure that we exclude all contacts that have the first name beginning with letter A. So our objective is to make sure that all contacts with the first name that begins with A are excluded from the list of available contacts that we can select from. Let's jump straight to coding. I'm using Visual Studio Code as my coding IDE. Please feel free to use any IDE of your choice. And here what you will see is that I like to use namespaces. And there's many reasons to that, but one of those is that JavaScript has a tendency of globalizing functions, and I like to make sure that everything that I do is contained within a namespace so that I cannot access it without referencing the namespace. First up, we create an onload function, and the reason why I create the onload function is simply to make sure that everything that I need is called from within that function. That is, all the events that I want to be triggered on my script, I want to make sure that those events are actually triggered inside onload function. And this makes it very easy for me to go into CRM and only register one function instead of having tons and tons of onload function sitting everywhere on my forms. I prefer this method because here I'm only calling a single function, which is the onload function. And inside, if we look into it, you will notice that inside this function we have a form context, and the reason that we use a form context is to make sure that we take that form context and we pass it across to all other functions that may require that. We've also instantiated our entity name, and if we need to use it elsewhere, we can always call it or pass it from that function to whoever is requesting for it. Entity ID as well. And down below the last line, you would notice that I've got filter contacts function, which takes three parameters. It's the execution context, it's the entity name, and the entity ID. And in our scenario, the entity name would of course be the account entity, and the ID, it would be the ID of that account, which we will be looking at. Next up is a second function, which is retrieve contact beginning with A. And this function, it takes an execution context, and we have instantiated a form context. And the important part of the importance of this function is the query. And this query, we've generated it using your standard advanced find filter. So if you go to advanced find filter, you can actually download the fetch XML that sits within the advanced find filter. Two important things. One is the condition. As you can see, the condition, it says the attribute that we're looking at is first name, and the operator is not like, and value is a with a percentage next to it, meaning that we're looking at all contacts with the first name where first name does not begin with a. We also specify the control which we are interested in. At the bottom, you'd see there form context.get control, and that's the name of the control. CRE60 underscore company CEO. That's the field or the control that you are interested in. And inside there, in that control, we want to add a custom filter. So two things that we need to specify in there. One is the filter, and in this case, we've created our filter from the fetch XML that we downloaded from Advanced Find. And the second one is the contact entity. So you need to specify which entity do you want this query to be executed on. Next up is our next function, add PreSearch to primary contact field. And of course, you could name this anything else that you like. I've given it this name because I've once used it on the primary entity. But in this case, of course, we are going to use it on the new company CEO field which we've created. But I haven't changed the name of the function. It doesn't really matter. But the two things that I want to highlight on this particular function, one is that it adds the PreSearch function which we created before, and that PreSearch function is called remove contact beginning with A. And you would notice two things which are very important, right? It is the namespace. So my function, the function that I'm calling inside this function, I am referencing it as follows. I'm saying D365 account functions dot, then the function name, which I'm calling in this case, and that function name is remove contacts that begin with first name beginning with letter A. And finally, we go and create a function called filter contacts. And in this filter contacts function, there could be a whole lot of things happening inside it. And I like to make sure that when I write code, I've got a function that does one specific thing and one thing only, so that I can be able to reuse that function elsewhere. Otherwise, if I have a function that has a lot of things going, then it becomes a problem if I want to go and use it somewhere else. For instance, inside this filter contacts function, I could be, maybe guessing the ID numbers based on birth date and whole lot of things. But let's not go into it. Let's go back to why we have this. So inside this function called filter contacts, you would notice that when we created this our onload function, we said onload function will call filter contacts. And of course, now we are creating that function, and that function is a very simple one. It instantiates the execution context. It gets the execution context as the parameter, and from there it gets the form context, which we then pass to our function add PreSearch filter to primary contact. So basically, that's all that you needed to do in order for you to achieve this goal. And again, the goal is that simple, which is you want to make sure that you retrieve all contacts except the contact that has first name beginning with letter A. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our code. And we're gonna go on now to our next step, which is to add this baby into a solution as a web resource, and then we associate it with the account form so that every time when the account form loads, this baby is called and we see the results of what we get once we have executed the code. Now we are creating our solution, and in this solution I am using the default publisher, and next up I am now registering my web resource. And what I always do, once again, this is by no means a rule, but this is something that I prefer. It is to name your script so that they make sense to somebody who looks into them when you are not around. And in this case, what I've done, I've got a script called account.js. So that's what my web resource is going to be called, account.js, so that all the functions that are executed inside an account entity are contained in that single script. So go on, add the web resource into your solution, as we have done that before. As you can see, there is our account.js JavaScript web resource, and next up we want to go and hook it up to the account entity. I have an account entity form open. I have added my web resource to the account form, and right at the bottom of the screen you would see there I have also selected on load event. So that's the event, the form's native CRM event, on load event, that I'm going to hook up my script to. And the next step just below, I'm saying from that script, this is the function that I want to call. And the way that I do that, again, I put on the fully qualified name. The fully qualified name is d365.account_functions.onload. Now let's move on to the debugging. So I've gone to the account entity. I've got this account entity that I had pre-created. So when I open the account entity, and of course I've enabled the debugging mode by clicking F12 on my keyboard. As you can see, the breakpoint is on debugger. As you can see, all the code which we have just written is now sitting there, and actually we did manage to hit that breakpoint. We hit that breakpoint. Right, now let's come back to the account entity which we looked at before. Now you can see when I look at all the contacts that are available to select as CEOs of this company, you would notice that they start from letter B. So you've got Ben Brown, you've got Dave McNice, David Mzoli, etc. So all the contacts that have the first name that begins with A have been excluded from the query. The source code for this particular project can be found on GitHub. Thanks for watching, and remember to click that subscribe button. And in our next video, we are going to be looking at complex pre-search filters. We're going to take exactly the same scenario and we will make it more complex by trying to pass parameters to the pre-search functionality, which natively you will not be able to achieve. So until then, see you on the next video, and remember